Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Movie Club from Indie Memphis. I am Miriam Bale. I'm the artistic director, and it is my great pleasure to be introducing the panelists for today, a discussion on the film Test Pattern, which we have in our virtual cinema, which has just been extended a week. So it now closes March 18th. So please, most of you have probably already seen it if you're watching this. Some of you, we tried to be spoiler free, so if you haven't seen it yet, you can watch it afterwards. And our wonderful moderator today is someone who has been part of Indie Memphis many times, and we are so glad to have her back. Jourdain Searles is a writer, critic, and performer who hails from Augusta, Georgia, and currently resides in Queens, New York. She has written for Vogue, Vulture, Vanity Fair, The New York Times, and The Hollywood Reporter, among others. And the filmmaker, the director of Test Pattern is Shatara Michelle Ford. She was born in rural Arkansas and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Both of those not far from Memphis. So we're so glad to have you back. In 2010, they received an MFA in screenwriting from Royal Holloway University of London. Shatara's work explores class, power, womanhood, identity, perception, and race, intellectually propelled by the LA Rebellion film movement, which I hope comes up tonight, and stylistically influenced by neoclassical directors. Their films feature marginalized characters with rich internal lives that defy dominant stereotypes. Their script, Queen Elizabeth, was featured on the 2017 Blacklist, and the Test Pattern is a debut feature, really remarkably accomplished. So thank you both so much for being here tonight. And I will leave the conversation to you, and I will be back for questions. So if you're watching on YouTube or Ventive, if you have questions, you can put them there in the comments. And if they will get to us. And if you're here on Zoom, you can put questions in the Q&A box. Thanks again to you both.
Hey, Shatara.
Hey, Jourdain. How's it going?
It's all right. It's all right. I love your talk. Very good talk. So I wanted to ask, since Miriam had already mentioned the LA Rebellion, could you talk a little bit about their the influence of those films and those filmmakers on this film?
Yeah, I think the film to talk about is Killer of Sheep,
Mm.
because what Charles Burnett's Killer of Sheep did for me was remind me that like, our experiences, our lived experience, our internal processing, our exploration of, like, I don't know, like, the reasons of why we're here and why we have to navigate the systems that we navigate, I don't think lend itself very easily to the very, I don't know, typical Hollywood structure. And um, there's something about Charles's film in particular, that particular film, that felt very complete and linear, and yet had all of these disparate pieces. So like the thing that held it together were these like overarching themes of, like, I don't know, like class strife and oppression in a particular space. But there were all these very small vignettes and moments that kind of like created and wove that together in a way that um, I don't know, when I saw it at the time for the first time, and I was like in college or something like that. Um, it kind of exploded my brain a little bit because I had such a very specific way of understanding how a story could be told, and then feeling really constricted by that. So it brought a lot of like liberation to just my like overall practice and conceptualization of my lived experience in a I don't know, cinematic rendering. Um, and I think in general, like that was also like the gateway film to everything else. I was very lucky to study under an academic who's no longer with us, but his name was Natangela Masalela. And he was a cultural theorist studying at UCLA, originally from South Africa, had like a really radical history that eventually brought him to UCLA to study. And he was there at the same time as all of these filmmakers. And he made this commitment to be the one to kind of record what they were doing and expand on it and like really hold record for them. And so a lot of the original like critical work about all of those filmmakers, the Los Angeles School, as they are sometimes known as, like he had done that. And so I'm sitting in his class and I'm like about postmodernism, and he continuously brought the work of the LA Rebellion to us as we're learning about this. And so it was very foundational for me, again, as my head was exploding and recognizing that my lived experience could be rendered in a very different way.
Yeah. Well, you can see that, I can see that in the film, because I was, and I mentioned it in my review, and I think we've talked about it, where, you begin the film in a very dark place, and then you immediately move to, a light romance. We begin with a moment where the assault is about to occur, the assault that kind of like uh, makes the shape and everything of the film. And then we move into the beginnings of like almost like a rom-com space. And I wanted to talk about like why you made that choice.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things, right? Like I'm trying to establish a a structure in which, we're about to experience this woman's journey. And I think that there's a larger question at hand. And when I was asking myself of, are we actually watching this? Is this a linear film? Is it a film told with a single flashback and then running linear? Like what is actually happening? And for me, what I was trying to like hold on to, what I was trying to express was like how memory influences our like lived experience. And so I can't fully tell you like in what moment this film is playing. I think if I had to like put my finger on it, it's actually like, I think that there's like 2 or 3 different timelines happening at different points, but it's all related to Renisha's like emotional processing of her experience. And so what the first scene is doing is setting up one of the timelines that will be drawn upon later. But then even, the earlier moments of Renisha and Evan's romance, I'm now giving you another timeline that we revisit when they're in the backyard talking about her tattoos, and when they're at the barbecue, which I will call a barbecue because to Evan and his friends, I believe that's what they think it is. Yeah, so those are the kinds of extra threads that are kind of related to that and Renisha's memory and processing. And then there's just like the extra stuff in between that kind of like couches in her lived experience. So the moments where she's just in just at work, or just you know going through the basic procedures of the thing that's happened to her that's propelling her on this like really ridiculous and absurd journey. She's drawing upon those 2 other time periods to kind of process and gather how she ended up in this place. Does that make sense? I feel like that's really convoluted, but
that makes sense. That makes
right.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I'll add to that, like, so I had 2 editors on this project, which bring really great things, besides the fact that one's a man and another's a woman. Katie Miller was with me on set, and she was editing as we were going. And Katie, her last thing she did before she handed it over was give a first pass of the film related to the kind of structure that I had written in the script. And it was out of order in the script, but the ways in which it was very different to what ended up on screen. And that had a lot to do with the fact that, you know, Katie puts this assembly together. I'm immediately horrified, as everyone is when they see like their first cut. But the thing that I was more obsessed with and more horrified with was the fact that like something wasn't registering in terms of like timeline. Like I was trying to anticipate something that I think needed a more kind of like emotional like thread, but I couldn't fully put my finger on it. So all I knew to do was go through my head in a movie that I know did it really well, or at least maybe pushed me to think this way, which was Internal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So I made Katie watch that with me after she showed me this cut, because I was like, I don't know what I need right now, but like there's something in this that's gonna help me inform how to like push this in the way that it needs to be pushed. And then when she finished with that, you know, Matt took that structure on and moved forward with it. But the thing is, Matt and I never really talked about what Katie and I talked about. So when Matt talks about the structure, he always goes, "Oh, well, it's just Goodfellas. It's just that structure." And I'm like, it is now, you're right. But there's also all this other stuff that was kind of going into it that was much more related to kind of like the emotional energy and the psychological journey that Renisha was going on that I couldn't just simply make it Goodfellas without having gone through that process.
Wow, those are like you know, the films that you meant, you know, Killer Sheep, Eternal Sunshine, Goodfellas, like three films that I would not even have thought about. Now I kind of want to watch them again to see the process, because I definitely want to understand it, because I think that the editing is really fascinating. So knowing that you had two editors and that you went through that process makes total sense. I do think that where you landed is great, because there's a sense of, you know, what's coming. Like it helps that you know that something is coming, and it kind of adds a little bit more urgency to it. And I also noticed that, like, I mean, you see like very clearly in the beginning that it is not it's not Will Brill. I almost forget, that's his name.
You say that. However, a lot of people don't register that at all, which adds another
Yeah.
layer of tension. So they go into this very light romantic scene thinking that, like, you know, Evan's going to be the one that they had just, you know, met. But that's a whole other thing, which we can talk about. But yeah, they really don't. They don't catch it.
Yeah, I actually, when I've watched it so many times at this point, but I was like, wait, I wanted to see, like, does it reveal Drew Fuller's face or not? And then I look and I see, yeah, that's Drew Fuller's face, and I know it well enough because I watched a lot of Charmed and Drew Fuller is on that show, so I recognized his face. But yeah, I can totally understand why other people would not have seen it. Uh, that casting is so interesting, because it's like a bunch of smaller actors that I've never seen, and then this one actor that I just would not expect to be there. How did you go into casting that?
Um, the character of Mike in particular, or like all of them?
In general, yeah, all of
Yeah,
them. Because the
well,
casting is really interesting. I find specifically Evan's whole thing to be fascinating.
my favorite question, and I know lots of people want to know about that, and there's lots of debate about Evan and my choice of casting Will and that whole thing too. So very, very happy to get into it. But what I'll say is that, you know, I think everybody knows now that like this is a credit card movie. I shouldn't even call it that at this point. It's a debt movie, because there were like other loans that were not, you know, backed by Bank of America or Chase or something like that. But
Mhm.
Visa. But yeah, you know, so that meant just, you know, kind of the way that movies work, it's harder to get people, especially, and like, look, I was definitely trying something. So there were a lot of reasons for why like traditional structural Hollywood wasn't going to get on board immediately and for a film like this. And what I do know is that I really love actors, and like I'm heavily influenced by like the way in which Mike Lee works and collaborates with actors. I really, really, love how Mike Nichols worked and collaborated with actors. I think a lot about Cassavetes. I think about just like, you know, I wanted that to be a part of like the collaborative process is like, and I even like built the script in a way to make sure that that opened up space for that. So um, I really, really, really wanted to work with like a brilliant casting director that could help me find those people. However, that was not really going to work. So I got the next best thing, which is I have an actor friend named Caroline Bloom who was in the movie for a short period of time. And not only is she a brilliant actor, she knows actors very, very, very well. And I truly think she should be a casting director herself. And she was pretty much mine. But I remember telling her that I was having trouble casting Evan. I have this very specific idea in my mind of who he needs to be. And she was like, okay, well, just like describe it, like just go into it. And so I tell her, and she's like, okay, I got three names for you. I already know, like I already think I know who you're going to pick, but like, I'm going to give you these three names. You should talk to all of them, but I think I know who it's going to be. And obviously she was very right and she knew it was going to be Will, but I'll get back to that in a second. What I should say before I get into all the other stories is that all of the cast came from like relationships, my friends. So Caroline was like the linchpin for Evan. Ludovica Isidori, the cinematographer, she works with Drew and knows Drew quite well. She told Drew about my project. Drew read it and was like, I want to work on this. Like, can I talk to her? So we met up and we talked, and it was a very like Drew's incredibly smart and really, really, really dedicated. And he just knew that the project was good and he wanted to collaborate in some sort of way. And so, I left it really open as I kind of figured out like where he was going to fit. I did not have him in mind for Mike at all. It just kind of happened that we kept talking about like the nuances of this character. And the more I kind of thought about Mike, the more I realized that Drew brought a particular like energy to that I thought was really, really necessary. But again, I'm going to put a pin in that because it's related to casting Will. So I'll get to that in a second. Gail Bean is someone who I've just loved as an actress, and I always, always, always wanted to work with. And Gail, I tracked down, but then she became my friend. So by the time Tess Pattern came around, I'd written the role of Amber for her specifically. And the same thing for Imani Starnes. She was another actress I really liked, and I became friends with and wrote Nurse Peg specifically for her. Brittany came from my editor, Matt Tassone. So Matt was working in the editorial department for Ballers. And, he knew I was looking for someone to play Renisha, again, a very specific idea in my mind. And Matt came up to me one day and he was like, hey, I think I found her. She's on Ballers and she never has a bad take, which is a very editor thing to say. Really useful, really true. She doesn't ever have a bad take. It's actually really incredible. Brittany really doesn't. But yeah, that was his selling point for her with me. And and I reached out to Brittany. She was pretty easy to get in contact with, and she was open to talking to me and read the script, and it worked. But as this relates to the casting of Evan and how Will ended up in the place, Will again is a very, 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 very smart person. And he immediately understood what I was trying to get at with the script. And he had his own questions about kind of like white allyship and how this stuff relates to it. And like, it was really nice to kind of get into the script in like a kind of political and cerebral level with him. So he was always somebody that like I was gonna hold on to. But I actually had like a chemistry read, and I was trying to feel Brittany and Drew out and Brittany and Will out. And it was specifically for Evan. But what I found ended up bringing this new dynamic to Mike that I didn't really know I needed, but it was really perfect. But like, you know, in Drew and Brittany's chemistry read, like they were just like super flirty. And like there was like this like really like intense, like strong like energy. But Drew, I think being a naturally charming person is really good at kind of like getting someone's attention and getting what he needs out of a scene. And that I thought was important for someone like Mike. I knew I needed somebody who was used to getting what they want, but also was really smart and really strategic about how to do that. So I kind of watched this dynamic play out and I was like, this is cute and it's like real hot, but like, it's not the right kind of like, the power dynamic actually exists in a way that I think I can really work with for Mike, which was a role that I was really nervous about because I knew whoever did it had to like truly understand what was going on, and also have to hold a lot of stuff, which again, Drew was prepared to do, could do, but also like understood the heaviness and the murkiness with it. So I think, you know, something I was definitely getting at, as I was creating the absolute worst case scenario for a survivor who has to advocate for themselves, in a society that's very quick to victim blame. You know, I had Renisha go out. I had her spend more time with a friend, even though she knew she had work in the morning. I had her drink more than she really wanted to, but it was still, you know, within the parameters of her ability. I had her willingly take weed gummies. I had her wear a dress. I'm not even gonna like describe it because I don't really think it matters. The fact that it was a dress, I think, is enough for people sometimes to be like, well, she was asking for it. So I kept kind of creating a scenario where I knew at every point there could be some sort of naysayer being like, it was her fault, it was her fault, it was her fault, it was her fault. On top of that, now you have this like incredibly charming person where there's this energy, this like attraction energy, who's really used to getting their way. And I knew that adding that layer would stress a whole bunch of people out, especially when the dynamic, between Evan and Renisha, the power imbalance is in a way that I think we're not used to seeing, or that people are not used to being comfortable with. And I was also really strategic. I set you up to feel like there's something off about them intentionally. Like, you know, Renisha in every scene with Will or Evan before, the bar, she's constantly leaving him. And I'm trying to build in this idea that, you know, for Evan, he feels like he doesn't have as much, and that there's going to be a point where Renisha's going to wake up one day and decide that she is just going to leave and never come back. Like there's definitely that insecurity piece with him. There's that little like just bit of like, you know, he's just always kind of unsure. And he always feels like he's having to like earn his keep and like, you know, constantly like prove his worth to her, even though that's a complete internal thing. I think Renisha's there and very happy, but that's something that he's dealing with that he's not fully like reconciling, or even addressing. So again, I was kind of layering all this stuff on intentionally because the whole point is that I'm trying to confront the ways in which we as a society and we as individuals are conditioned and embrace, certain arguments and ways of engaging with survivors. All the things that I have heard before, all the things that I have to navigate, all the things that are hurtful and frustrating to me, I wanted to kind of set up in a place and have people be challenged by it. So I don't know. I feel like I've talked a long time, but I think I covered that. But did I get into that? At least I feel like I explained the Drew part of it. But
yeah. I mean, you got into so much of it. Yeah. it was all very engaging. No, I mean that. I don't know if I sound like, sorry, I don't know. I worry sometimes that I don't sound sincere. I'm being very sincere.
No, I got you. I got you. Look, this is the other thing though. Like, can I ask you? Because I genuinely want to know. What is it? What are people so bothered by with the character of Evan?
I mean, I don't know because I mean, I don't know. I haven't had like a. I feel like Test Pattern is one of those movies that nobody wants to have like an open conversation about. Everybody just has private feelings, and it's hard to know what they are. But I mean, Evan is really interesting because he's essentially the kind of white guy that you would assume is really harmless. And there are things about him that I noticed, like just like small things, like the fact that he's wearing flip-flops. Like through the whole like hospital thing, he's just wearing flip-flops. And I was fixated on them.
I
Just like
know.
he's like they're going on this journey with like all of this importance and he's just wearing flip-flops. It's just it's wild. um but yeah, like I mean in the dinner scene that they have, like right when they're getting together, he says, it seems like you always know what you're talking about, like that kind of thing. And so it's, I don't know, it's so interesting that he doesn't go to the bar with her. It's so, I was just like, wait, but why aren't you going? um it's interesting that he, I don't know, the way that her life changes after meeting him, I think is really interesting because like as much as you say that like she's in the lead, her life changes in a way where it looks like a life that he's more comfortable with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. But
And
sorry, go on. Go on.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, no, I just think that there's like, I mean, again, I'm talking about power all the time in this movie, right? And I think
Yeah.
that human beings are constantly in negotiation with each other. Like we come in with these very power differentials, and you're in, this is all very tacit, but we're constantly kind of negotiating and rearranging, and things kind of like calibrate and then kind of tip other, depending on situations. And you know, I think that there are a couple of things going on with Evan and Renisha that like are very subtle but very, very there. And it's the fact that like, yeah, okay, so Renisha makes more money and she's very educated comparatively, but she also lives in like a predominantly white city. And it's like, I know Black folks live in Austin. There aren't that many. And like the numbers prove it, but like Black folks are leaving Austin in droves every single year. And like some of that's just because there's nowhere else to go because it's so heavily gentrified. But also like culturally, there's not, the tide is changing in some ways. Um, and I think that is reflected. And I think in Renisha's space, like where she works, the environment that she's caught up in, like it's an incredibly white space. And so although she has these things, she's also really used to being the only one. And I think that she is someone who's highly aware. And again, I think, if you're doing an MBA and like in really corporate spaces as a Black woman, you're constantly worried about everyone else's comfort instead of your own. And so I think that because of those things that already kind of tip the power differential for Renisha in one way, she made a lot of concessions to make Evan feel more comfortable. And also like Evan's life is a part of the dominant culture. So therefore she's slipping into it as opposed to the other thing. Because I also get the sense that like, when Renisha and Evan meet, she's a student, and or she was a student and she's now kind of in this job, and like, but this is not her home. And so I get the sense that like because of that, there's still a lot of like space for influence about where one person ends up and socializes and roots themselves. And I think Evan being, to go back to that dinner scene, I think what clinches the deal for Evan in some ways. And this wasn't like a smooth move. It's just very much who he is. I think Renisha's also really used to not being seen or heard. So the fact that like he hears her, that he acknowledges that she does seem to know what she's talking about all of the time, I think meant something to her. And I think that was kind of the foundation for which something could actually grow from. So I think she was willing to give a lot of stuff up. I also have the sense, and you know, when Brittany and I kind of built this character together, we were building a person who, again, was tightly wound and spent a lot of time worrying about other people's perceptions of her instead of kind of doing things that were for her. And there's an argument to be made that maybe she's still doing that with her partner. But what I would also say is that maybe Evan's laid back attitude or kind of other vibe encouraged her to just kind of chill a little bit, and try new things and explore, you know, getting more tattoos or whatever it is that, you know, they decided to do. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But again, power starts to shift and things are being renegotiated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can really tell that in, you know, as they're going on their journey. Specifically, I was just fixated on him not letting her go to the bathroom. I was fixated on that because it's just such a thing where it's like it's you know, he could rationalize it in the sense of the test isn't going to work right. But it's also just like you're preventing her from going to the bathroom. Like it's a thing where I, you know, and it was very relatable in the sense that, so like if you're assaulted, you're supposed to go to the hospital, you're supposed to get a rape kit, you're not supposed to shower, you're just supposed to go straight there. And the first thing that happens when you're violated in that way, at least in my experience, is that the first thing that you want to do is go to the shower. You want to just like evacuate, you want to cleanse everything. And so it goes against really all of your instincts to just go go straight to the hospital exactly how you are. Like it's just, and just like watching him not understand that, and maybe even understand it but also not care. And it, I notice it because like, especially because after they go through the whole thing and then they go home, he finally asks her how she's doing, and then it makes me realize, like, did he ask the entire time? And I don't think that he did. And it's so like,
Look,
I don't even know how to describe it. Like I keep on, I don't even know how to just, the whole time I was just like getting angrier and angrier. Like let her go to the bathroom. And then when she drops the cup, like I was like, okay, this is what had to happen. Like she had to drop that cup because this cup is like this like weird, like this thing that she's carrying around. It's so,
I know.
I, it's so weird talking about pee, but like, yeah, it's just.
I know. Well, like again, you know, something I was trying to get at, the thing that I'm really, and I don't know, like I know this makes people feel uncomfortable, and but it's very real. I don't know. I'm just deeply invested in like let's talk about power like all the time. Like let's talk about
Yeah,
how we abuse it. We're all capable of abusing it. We all do it. Like this is the only way if we're trying to have some sort of semblance of an equitable society, or at least just trying to practice equity within the people we're in relationship with. I mean, friendships, work, everything. Then we have to acknowledge it and like get into
yeah,
it and move on, right? So
yeah,
look, I think that under this is the other thing that's really important. When you when you are a person who is very aware of the power you hold over another person, or people due to inherent like systemic and cultural things, and you're trying to kind of like dismantle that. Note that I use that word. Note how we've heard that word a lot when it relates to white people and their allyship for us right now in this moment. Um, it takes a lot to constantly think about what the right, correct, comrade, like um, equitable thing is to do. It actually takes work because we've been wired and the system supports the other thing. So when you're under great strains, it's even harder to do that. And that's when people forget. And we see that, right? Like we talk about the pandemic right now and how that has actually exacerbated all the shit that's already here, right? It's just made it worse for all of us because there's too much for any individual to kind of like really take on and process. And so you default so quickly into the ways in which like our systemic and like structured like environments kind of put us into our innate, our indoctrinated, our conditioned ways of behaving and thinking come just into back into play. And it's so hard to kind of like override that. So the idea about Evan is that Evan is a good guy, but Evan's got some of his own shit. Evan, on the best of days, is dealing with his own levels of insecurity, his jobs, like his job stuff, like his direction in life, his, his certainty about if he wants to be in this relationship or not, and if the person that he loves wants to be in the relationship with him, like stuff that we don't even know about, his family, all of it. There's all of this stuff going on for him on top of just trying to be a good guy as, as a man, but also as a white person. And all that's kind of hard for him because it's not like he's done any work in critical race theory or, has had the moment where he wants to be a better ally and went to, the white people to support Black people club. I forget what that club is called, but you know what I'm talking about. It's not like he's done all that work, right? So we just got a dude who's feeling really small and really scared and really frustrated. What happens? All the defaults come back in. Well, I'm the man in the situation and I need to protect the woman that I care about, that means something to me, who is mine. So as a man, I have a right to kind of tell her, to direct her, because I know what's best for her. This is my job. I am to protect her. That happens to people when they feel like they don't have control, when they feel very overwhelmed. So he defaults into these things. Look, I understand the intent. I understand the feelings. It's still damaging and it's still not okay, but it happened, right? So there's that. There's that. So when I look at Evan acting all peak white man, yelling in these hospitals, telling
just
Renee
yelling in the hospital, just that stressed me out so much.
Screamed in the hospital and sneered at Renisha and said, "Hold it." Like, my God, okay? But like, I recognize that that is coming from a place of chaos.
Yeah.
Just trying to get control. He's just trying to do what he thinks is right without actually consulting the person. Because again, that's a radical idea, the autonomy of a person. So the fact that he has not checked in with her, because he's not set up to think that way. That is not his default. So that's why the conflict happens, right? But look, we all make those mistakes. We, like I said at the start, like power differentials are just a part of our relationships. We often will violate them. But also what I'm trying to say in this movie is that like a lot goes a long way with accountability, like taking accountability for your actions, recognizing what you've done wrong, addressing it, and then maybe doing a bit of reconciliation with it. And that's the thing that Evan kind of fails to do. And I personally think, and Will and I talked about this, that he knows that he's failing to do it. There's something about his willingness to not address to Renisha how maybe he violated her boundaries and autonomy by dragging her around, making her hold her pee, and like acting a fucking fool everywhere. Like, I don't know. I think he does know though.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the sense of like pride in his like he's not pride as in like a happy pride, but pride is in like there's something holding him back mentally from having the conversation that he needs to have with her.
Yeah, I think he just doesn't want to admit that he did something wrong because again, he's very scared. I think he feels so insecure in that moment. Like even admitting that it was wrong will make Renisha leave him. You know, like maybe he won't be able to come back from that. And again, think about all of the times and because I'm sure all of us in our life have either been in that moment where we feel like we know we messed up and like to acknowledge it might make it all fall apart. And if we haven't, we've been on the other side where you're sitting there being like, why can't you just say this? Why can't you just acknowledge this? And it's tragic. Because like sometimes that's all you gotta do. And then like take the steps to heal from it and move on. But ignoring it's not gonna fix it.
No, no, it doesn't. And that
No.
really adds all of the uncertainty to the ending, just how unsettling the ending is. This is, I mean, kind of a switch gears, but still related. I wanted to talk a little bit about how there really isn't, like, in terms of the power dynamics of this film, in terms of the centering of a Black woman, this film really doesn't have a peer that I could think of. Um, and I just wanted to know, like, if you had really thought about that, like this idea of, in my opinion, literally like breaking ground in terms of, because when we see like Black women in relationships in films, there really isn't a ton of introspection in terms of their place in the relationship. You see like relationships play out and, it can be like kind of like playful, like two can play that game or something like that. But I've never seen it, really under the microscope in this way. And I'm sure that it was, somewhat inherent because of this white partner. But I just found myself, like every single time I watched it, I was just like, I'm struck by it because this is something that I've never seen before. And it was something that I didn't realize that I needed until I saw it. And just, I just can't think of any. Could you think of anything to compare it to, like in terms of like Black, like I mean, like in terms of like white women, we can think of so many, but yeah, I just don't know if there's anything else there. What do you think?
No. I mean, it's cool to think that, Michaela Cole and I were talking about very similar things at the same time. I think what people don't appreciate is that, I wrote this movie 3.5 years ago and I made it 3 years ago. And that's not too far off the timeline for what Michaela was doing. And not too far off the timeline of what happened to her. So, we're in conversation about the same things in two different countries, and using similar mediums but different. So I'll say that, but that's the closest thing that I can think of, to be honest with you. And I think I don't that wasn't lost on me. I wasn't out there trying to like pioneer because boy is that lonely
Right.
and awful. But what I did know to be true is that we weren't doing something. This all honest, I can't even say that. I don't know what like I don't know what else I would have done. Like that was just the perspective I had. And like at the time, I was very confused about why everyone had such an issue with it. You know what I mean? Like I literally could not get financing for this movie. No one really understood what I was trying to do. People really struggled with Renisha as a concept. Um, and it was really disheartening at the strike because I was just like, I don't, this is so important and like in like necessary and immediate. And I don't get what people are missing. But again, it reminds me in the ways in which like we are, again, as a society, so conditioned to not see Black women. I'm just going to be real. That's truly what it is. Like, I don't know why this seems so revolutionary. It really isn't. It's like we're gonna sit with Renisha at every instinct when we think that we're gonna, you know, shift the POV, we're not. And when it feels uncomfortable and when it's scary or when it, you know, when it's hard, we're not gonna avoid it. But what I'm also not gonna do is lean into voyeurism to labor the point that you need to care about her. You care about her because she exists, period. I don't need to show you the thing that happened to her that we all know happened to her. I don't need to show that to you to prove that like she matters and that her interior life is worth sitting with. The other thing I'll say is that I think, you know, I think we're all as in like as marginalized folks, um, we're all prone to wanting to sit in fantasy and have the warm bath. And I think that's because life is hard. And again, I didn't do this for my pleasure. I made this out of necessity.
Yeah.
But I don't think that this film is medicine either, because isn't that the really beautiful, wonderful thing about art? Art is supposed to provoke and challenge and confront and interrogate and hold record. And so, you know, when I, as the world got worse, because let's be real, it's been bad forever. But as it got worse and I came of age and I got to a point where I had the ability to make things, it didn't feel right for me. And like, this is just me. It didn't feel right for me to sit and not do some of that work. And I feel like also as the audience, and I mean, and I'm talking specifically about Black folks, Hollywood does us a disservice every day. It's like they underestimate our ability to be challenged, and they underestimate our like film literacy. And I'm not saying like, you know, everyone needs to be like familiar with the canon. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like we can put two and two together in a very subtle film. Like we can understand what's happening, and like everything is so like overly preached and like beating us down, and like we don't need that. We don't need that. So I thought also what a wonderful treat to be given like work that we can sit with for a while and talk about and like and push ourselves and each other. um like isn't that, I don't know, like I find that valuable, and I also find that like enjoyable in some point. And I'm not trying to say my movie is enjoyable, but I do think that the experience of like working through this and talking about this and being provoked is there is something like gratifying, at least to the brain, right? Is you're like, I got something to do,
Yeah.
you know? So I don't know. I sit with that too all the time.
Yeah, I you know, when you were talking about you know, having trouble getting it financed, I was thinking about, because you know this isn't the only film where we see a Black woman deal with abuse, but I think this is maybe one of the only films where there is not a triumphant narrative at the end. There isn't like, you know. And surprisingly, when I think about stories about Black women kind of like dealing with stuff, it's always like entertainers. You know, it's always like, you know, like Bessie or introducing Dorothy Dandridge or like What's Love Got to Do with It. It's always like it has to be this big entertainer figure. And this is just a woman. And I think it's hard to make films about Black women. At least it's hard like within the mechanisms that we have to just make a film about a Black woman, just a woman.
Mm-hmm. 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 I mean, and there's so many reasons for that, right? We
Yeah.
need to think about the television event of the year that happened 2 days ago to remind us of why that's so difficult. But, you know, again, it's not lost on me that, you know, I talk all the time, I think all the time about like, again, like equity work, and especially in this moment, and what like true kind of like racial and gender justice looks like, and how we again as a society are not good at considering our most vulnerable first. And I mean most vulnerable as in like the system is created for one type of person, and then there's everyone that kind of sits outside of that circle, and then there's further and further and further out. And I'm talking about the ones who are further out that fall through the cracks. And that tends to be us. And if it's not us, it's Black trans women. And I think that's a very specific thing that we don't like to address, because if we're constantly the ones that are falling through the cracks, then therefore we have our journeys are much more like difficult, arduous, like harrowing. And it's within that there's still joy and lightness and all the other kind of stuff. But the reality is that it's also very, very, very hard. And nobody wants to really sit with that and admit that. And I think that's a problem, right? Because if we can't sit with that, how do we expect to like do anything about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just asking people to do something about it, honestly. It's like you don't like watching this, do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's weird because like when we talk about seeing ourselves on screen, there's like so much focus in the conversation of like seeing yourself as the center of something or this like gigantic figure. And for me, I guess the thing about Test Pattern that, you know, made me that makes me like keep thinking about it and keep thinking about it is because this might have been one of the first times that I saw myself in a real way, not like in a, you know, I like it, not about like doing something really cool or anything like that, but just like, no, I know what this experience is. I know what it was like feeling in this moment. And the way that you craft the film, you know, really allowed us to sit in those moments of thought. Like it felt like we were in Rainisha's mind, and it was a mind that was very familiar to me. And I feel, and I hope that, you know, I mean, I would assume so. Have you talked to many, you know, people about the film? Like, you know, gotten a lot of reactions from Black women, not just people, but Black women specifically.
Yeah, I did quite a few test screenings, specifically because again, it wasn't really to, you know, get a high audience score. It's much more about like seeing if the stuff that I was doing was tracking. Because again, it was all deliberate. I just really wanted to make sure. And like there were things that like I was always kind of experimenting to see if I was able to kind of dial down even further, because I'm like, oh, they got that. Let me see next time if I dial this down, they're going to get it again. So because I would like, I don't like being obvious. If I can be as subtle as possible, great. Anyway, so you know, my producer and I were very deliberate with the makeup of these test screenings. You know, we'd always try to, you know, mix it up, and I'm like, okay, well, how about we do this one with just like all Black people like our age and see what happens, and like let's make sure there's some dudes in there and like some queer people, and like just see how they react to it. And what I will say across the board is that, you know, the straight Black women who sat and watched this movie, so the queer ones too, but particularly the straight Black ones, very much responded and knew exactly, like there were like there was, it was a really nice thing to kind of like sit with and see like this like balance of recognition. But I don't mean the kind of like you know, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of like excessive joy of just like, oh yeah, they look like me, but very much like, no, I feel seen, or I'm feeling talked to right now, or I'm feeling like called out in this moment, or like, like this is maybe even too much, that it's like it's just here and I'm sitting with it. And so there was that. But what I found even more interesting is that after these like test screenings, we would have people like talk about the movie. Because again, I'm trying to figure out what people are getting and not getting. And there was always arguments, like, because again, everyone's coming at it from a different point, but it was always the Black women in our age bracket, particularly, that were like, very like passionate about Renisha, very, and like in all the ways. Even, I remember this one particular conversation where there were some cis hetero Black dudes about our age who were talking to some cis hetero Black women about our age, about Renisha and Evan. And these girls, man, they were like, leave him alone. Like, it was just kind of like, I get how this happened. And like, I am here. Like, look at him. Look at him. He just like, he takes care of her and he loves her. And he just like, and like, there was this thing that was like this very like impassioned kind of protection over this thing. They're like, let her have it. Like this person who just loves her. And like, at the same token, there's these guys that are just kind of like, I didn't get that. I was completely taken out of it. I don't even know how that happened. I don't understand it. And they're like, of course you don't. And like, that was a thing. That was a lot. And then
the relationship.
Yeah, the relationship.
They didn't understand the relationship.
I had one guy say to me that he was so distracted by Evan and Renisha that he kind of like missed the whole movie because he was still trying to figure out how that happened. And I found that very fascinating. But then it would kind of like, but then the conversation would shift in the same group, because then we're talking about, well, what did Evan do? Was that correct? And most of the dudes were like, yeah, like that's your job. Like you've got to protect her. And so this like very like patriarchal thing kind of like set in, and like then they were in agreement with like what Evan was up to and what he was doing. And I thought that was interesting. And I don't really know what to say about it, but that happened. And I watched like people fight about this. Literally like debate, like strangers debate about this. But like, again, like I said, we mixed, races and like sexual orientation and like gender identity and age groups. And what I will also say is that the older you got, the less this movie tracked for you. I'd say like 45 and up, it was real iffy. It was interesting, the number of white dudes who came up to me, again, around our age, who would be like, that sat with me, like, wow, like it made me think about some things. I think I might have done something like this. And I'd be like, which thing? And they'd be like, both. I'd be like, oh, yeah. Which is really interesting. Great. I got some like very impassioned letters from white women around our age that again saw it and tracked it and understood it. And so like, again, like they're like, everybody's coming at it from a very different place. But again, the thing that was most important to me, I think, was that feeling of like recognition, whether it was chilling or elating, but from Black women in particular.
Wow, I wish I had seen those that's the kind of debate that I wish I was part of. And I mean, that's the thing that sucks about the pandemic. It's that we can't all just like, I don't know, like be at the Metrograph arguing.
I know.
Which sounds amazing right now.
Yeah, and I kind of hate doing these Q&As is I'm like, well, I'm just like letting everybody know. Like one of the things what I enjoyed about the test screenings is that I never told anybody what my intent was or what I was looking at. I was just wanting to know what they saw. And all of it, is valid in their own perspectives, So I kind of was always constantly tracking the ideologies and like the positionalities of these people, because I'm like, yep, it's all there. But yeah, I know I'm sad about it. I'm sad.
No, I'm glad that I've gotten to talk to you about it. I mean, every single time I talk to you about it, it's just like more happens. And and I also just like talking to you. But I feel like we should open it up to questions. I feel like we're about that time.
Sure, that's perfect. Thank you both so much. So if you have questions now, you can put questions in the chat box on Inventive or YouTube, or if you're here on Zoom, you can put them in the Q&A box. Or if you feel like joining the conversation, feel free to put your hand up and I will bring you into the conversation. I'll promote you to panelist and we can see you and talk to you. I'll start. I'll ask the very boring question that I know you have talked about. You sort of hinted at it, Shatara, and then you said you've talked about it a lot. But just in case, since this is, there may be some people listening now who haven't heard those conversations, could you talk a little bit about how you got this film made? Like you said, it was a struggle. So tell
Yeah.
us how you accomplished that.
Yeah. I initially had for so I mean, making films is and shorts or whatever, you're constantly asking for money to do it. I've never been a person who came from any kind of money. And I was never one of those lucky people where folks are just kind of giving money, but I spent a lot of time asking. And I had a really wonderful friend who is wealthy, who invested in a short film that I was going to do. Um, and as I was prepping for that short film, I wrote test pattern and I gave it to my producer. And my producer was like, we need to stop what we're doing right now and figure out if we can use some of this money or all of this money to like start pre-production on this feature. Um, and the reason why she even thought that way was because it was a 35-page script. And I don't mean that it was therefore 35 minutes long. It was that it was a structure and a framework for a feature that I was gonna kind of like collaborate and expand with my actors and kind of grow it as we grew together. But that also gives me a really special thing, which is the ability to kind of sit with something and know and give myself a fixed amount of days. And I think one of the biggest issues for independent filmmakers and just like young filmmakers coming up is that although filmmaking has become democratized through digital and the fact that we have phones that have cameras, um, the thing that I think keeps us from, especially if you're a marginalized person, from like elevating and kind of getting more trust to do things with more money and like in time is uh, like having like a good base foundation to do the shots well, to execute a scene perfectly. And the only way to do that is to give yourself the right amount of time. So I always knew that as a filmmaker, like my first time, I should be giving myself a generous amount of days to be able to really navigate the work. And so, Pinchin, my producer, and I like really aimed for something between 19 and 22 days that like just made sure that like we could really sit with every single scene and do it right. Um, so there's that. What that meant in practice is that I had about $100,000 that I had received for this short. And with my executive producer's blessing, we turned that into pre-production funds for test pattern. And so that was in November of 2017. On top of that, I had excellent credit, but it's because I took out student loans to pay for college. And although they were not paid down, and they still aren't to this day, because I was paying them on time, I had very, very, very good credit. So I tanked it and I took out as many credit cards as I could, which was at the time was 9. Then my partner, who had good credit too, mainly because he was a recent uh, citizen of the United States and like had not had much of a history, but had some credit. We tanked his too, and we took out some more credit cards. We took out a couple of loans, like actual, like I took out an Upstart loan. Uh, and like another like private loan. And this is all kind of through the course of us just ramping up to make sure that we could pay our crew and get the equipment that we need and fly everybody to Austin and like give them housing and adequate stuff. And like, that's the other thing that I think we don't appreciate about indie filmmaking is that you're not the only one taking a risk. Like, yeah, I didn't get a salary, but especially as I'm trying to like make sure that as many marginalized people like me can do the big job, I can't make the assumption that everybody can do it for free and eat nothing. So it was really, really, really important to make sure that like the money that we spent was to give people salaries so they can do their job well too. Like this is a massive equity issue in independent film. I will never respect anyone that's like, I made a film for $3. I'm like, well, whoever you worked with did not get paid. And I don't feel good about that. I just don't. So there's that too. Anyway, so loans, credit cards, all of that. And there got to a point where we ran out of money. And this was around day 19. And we were going to LA. And I had, tried to get my film financed properly by other producers and financiers in LA. And a couple of them that were excited about me and excited about the project, but weren't ready to pull the trigger, said, hey, come back to us when you've got something or when you run out of money and, show us what you got and maybe we can do something. And I did. And, they watched these scenes, these sequences, and I told them about my time in Austin and how I had 3 more days and I got to go through post. And they all passed on the premise that, distribution is hard and there's no guarantee that they're going to have a return on their investment, even if it's small. If there's no guarantee that I'm going to get into a major film festival, which I could not guarantee and also didn't happen. I didn't get into Sundance or Berlin or South by or Tribeca or any of those. And so, in that respect, they weren't wrong to not back it, so yeah, I ended up still with no money and then took out some more credit cards that had some pretty aggressive like interest rates because at this point my credit was not hot for the good deals, but we did what we had to do. And here we are. And I'm still, and my producing partner who took out a loan too, we're still paying down the debt on that.
So you don't have to answer this, but
Mhm.
do you think you'll have any hope of recuperating what you personally put out on this project,
No.
or the hope that in future projects?
Future projects, sure, and a part of this is a gamble, right? It's an investment in your own career. And what I will say is that um, I'm very lucky. I mean it. I'm lucky. Um, but I think what also relates to that is the fact that I'd kind of reconciled that it was okay that, like, I was okay with the debt. I've been in debt most of my life as an adult. Like, I didn't come from money, but I had big dreams, like going to college, which shouldn't cost me anything, but did. And so I was used to carrying around a big old load of debt. So this didn't really scare me. I'm like, well, just tack it on to the 100 grand I already got, like whatever, So I think that made it easier for me to do that in ways that maybe other folks wouldn't. Also, what I will say, we talked about LA Rebellion. I interned for Charles Burnett my senior year of college. And I remember talking to Charles right before I graduated. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I have all this student debt. Like, I'm never gonna be able to make a movie. Like, I don't have money to make a movie. Because he was trying to encourage me just to like make something. And he was like, go bankrupt, doesn't matter. Like, do what you do. And at the time, I was so shocked by this concept. I was like, no, like, this is the worst advice I've ever gotten. He's telling me to go bankrupt. Like, oh my God. Like, he's like, it's fine. You'll be fine, but make the movie. And I truly did not appreciate that. And that is actually like advice I had forgotten was given to me. And here I am, like, over 10 years later, doing exactly what I didn't go bankrupt, thank God, but like doing exactly what he told me to do, because the work was worth it. It was important. So The other thing I'll say is, and this is related to me being lucky, is that other good advice that I got is that if you are so privileged to have a choice, um, pick a distributor that believes in your film, but not just a distributor that believes in your film, but a press and marketing department that believe in your film.
Mhm.
And that will do the thing that it needs to do for you. And so I'm so grateful to Kino Lorber for believing in my film across the board, because that's what's given me a chance to have a career. That's what it was. Like I said, this movie has been out for 2.5 years or something like that. It's gone to the festivals, it's won some things, and yet nothing was happening in my career. Kino Lorber backs my movie and pushes it hard, and here we are. And like, now I'm spending the last 3 weeks in constant Zoom meetings with people who literally would not talk to me days before.
That's amazing. That's such good practical advice. And shout out to our friends at Kino, including David Nin for being part of that team. Um, there's still no questions in the chat, but there's a comment from M. Mole who says, thank you so much for this backstory. It's inspiring and demystifying, and also for your ethics for paying crew and services and recognizing this. As a producer, I'm in awe of your integrity. And I think it is unusual. So thank you so much for all of that practical information. This is another question while I'm waiting to see if anyone else asks. You encountered, you're in a good place now, and you talked about how this is exactly the film you wanted to make. And we're so grateful for that. What was some of the, aside from the not guarantee about being in festivals, what was some of the pushback or reluctance that you found about this project, just out of curiosity?
Again, it's not a very commercial film, which I heard a
Yeah.
lot, whatever that word means. I truly don't know what that word means, but I heard it. I think I know what they mean. I think it's not about white people, or at least when it is about white people, it challenges white people, and people don't feel good about that. It doesn't have a very clean ending, which people don't, they get really uncomfortable about. I guess that means it's not commercial. Again, it's about a Black woman. Maybe that is an issue. That's not commercial. Maybe it's addressing things that are very much in our lived experience, are very real, but make people feel icky. So again, that's not commercial. So I think it's a lot of that stuff. Like, and test pattern also requires a lot of patience. I think again is especially executives who are inundated. Again, this is one of the downsides to the democratization of our art form, is that you're just inundated with content constantly. And for decision makers and gatekeepers, that means that they're just, stuff is just in their face, and if it doesn't grab your attention right then, you pass, you move on. And that goes for everybody, like we all do it. We all have this problem. And I do think that that's an institutional problem in every aspect of our business: the distributors, the festival programmers, the agents, the sales agents, the managers. Everybody has this problem. We got to do something about it. So when you have a film that has been called a slow burn, you can't make a decision about it in 10 minutes, but people do. So I think that's another thing. I think a lot of folks passed in this film without even watching the whole thing.
That is honest.
Yeah, but it's real. It's so
Yeah.
real. Like, we've all done it. So I do think, because I even in the feedback, I kind of get that sense. I'm like, oh, you didn't watch it, but that's okay. Like, I get it, and that was a risk. I had in early notes and early cuts, I was told, like, this is risky. Like, the fact that we don't fully see what, because I'm setting you up for something for the first half of the film, and like, you either can ride with that, or you don't. And I think that tries with some people's patience, especially if they're not, like, if you're just looking to be entertained, you're just looking to get to the point, you're just looking for the stuff, like, that is really, really difficult to sit with. But again, we miss out on so much great art by doing that. And I don't really know if that's the best way of doing things. And then there's other, like, really simple stuff. And like, again, I'm just going to be really real. again, in the age of like inundation, I think there are a lot of people who don't want to be the first one, because there's just so much and you're just not sure. And sometimes you just got to have the brave person say, I like this and I want to do it. And who's with me? And I think that was a lot of what was going on, is that there was like this game of chicken, in the circles that I was and in the places, like no one wanted to be the first one and no one was really sure, because it's just so different, and it doesn't fit the kind of like mindset and algorithm that they're used to participating in. So again, that's where it's really important to like have folks who have a little bit more agency, as we talk about power again, like advocate for you. And I got very lucky with some advocates that meant that people paid attention, and yet it still didn't happen. You know what I'm saying? Like it still didn't. And so and I will forever be grateful to, Soraya McDonald as well, because she came to Black Star and she watched the movie and she found a way to write about it. And that gave me some of that validation that people were waiting for, as I didn't want to be the first one, to kind of like champion it. So
That is so real, especially with Black women, because as you just talked about, you're going to be the first with almost everything you do because the history is so recent. Yeah, and I think people are, when they're looking for something new, they're looking for something that reminds them of the big thing that happened before, the next Gilbert, the next Wes Anderson, whatever it is, that's such a problem. Okay, a couple questions. And thank you for for being here. Kayla says, "Hello, everyone. Loving this conversation. I'd love to hear Shatara talk a bit about the cinematography and framing throughout the film, and the experience of making the film of a film in the South."
yeah. On the South Point, I was born in Arkansas. I was raised above the Mason-Dixon line, but just barely. So like literally you can drive like 5 minutes down Missouri and you're like, oh. And I spent a lot of time in Memphis. Memphis is just a day trip for me. So when I learned how to drive, that's where I was going. It's also halfway to my grandparents. So anyway, what I'm saying is that I have a very strong affinity for the South, because it's just what I'm made of and where I'm from and where my people are from. If I could, if it made sense, I probably would have shot this in Missouri or Arkansas, but I couldn't. Um, Austin's just a very friendly, filmmaker friendly city. And there's so many things that were comparable to my experience growing up in Missouri. So it works out. But yeah, it's lovely to be in a place where I can't explain. This is gonna sound weird. Jordan, you might know what I'm talking about, but like when you're in Jordan, does your skin feel different? Like the way that like the sun hits your body and like the warmth, and like something feels very like natural about it. Like the humidity in my, like everything is like, the stuff is kind of unbearable, but also like it just feels correct. So, and there's like a lot of spaciousness. There's a lot of things that I really like as a filmmaker that I think informed me as a filmmaker from just like the environment that I was raised in and what I was brought up around. And like, there's just like, there's a lot of like vast space, especially in Arkansas, just like, not a lot going on. And like weather is such an event. And there's like these big things that kind of come through. And I, again, really enjoyed that in Texas. And it just felt very, very correct for me, just as a person on a molecular level. But anyway, so there's that. There also were things that were not so great, but that's a whole other story. I don't know if I want to get into that, but there were things that were not so great. But Ludovica Isadori is amazing. And I am so, so lucky to have her as a collaborator and as a friend. Ludovica is one of those white people that's made it their business to figure out how to light Black skin properly, which I'm grateful to her for, and it should be a requirement for all people, but she's very good at it. So already that makes it a joy to work with her, right? Like I don't have to explain that to her. I don't have to be confused about that. It's just the things that she does. But more than that, I think because Ludovica and I have such a good like understanding of each other, she kind of understands how my brain works. And therefore, like things that I'm not really able to fully articulate in terms of like POV or just kind of like framing or lensing, she'll kind of be like, "Oh, come over here, look at this, like try it." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that's exactly right." She's very good at expressing the thing that's in my head that I really don't know how to articulate. So I'm happy about that. We do spend a lot of time watching movies and talking about movies. So we also look at a lot of art together, and we're sharing pictures all the time. And I think she does have a very good sense of like who I am. But more than that, Ludovica also just has her own strong sense of like material and how that translates visually. And I've just learned to always trust her, to be honest with you. Like occasionally I'll win the fight. She might frame something up and I'll look at it. I'm like, "I don't know what this is. What are you doing?" And she'll be like, "No, this is right." And we'll go back and forth for a while, and then usually she is correct. Ludovica is usually correct. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's such a wonderful, special thing to have a cinematographer that can. And I say this for all of my heads of department. I really, truly wanted to hire people who were better than me at the thing that I was, hiring for. And man, all of them are that in spades. It's such a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to trust people who are just incredibly good at what they do.
And being able to pay them means you can really ask of them to really reach their limits, I'm sure.
Oh, of course. And no, they should have been paid more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I can't wait to be able to do that. But yeah.
Well, that's great. There's one more question from Nubia Yassin, who's a Memphis wonderful filmmaker. And she said, "Thank you so much for being so transparent about how you paid for the film. At the risk of sounding a bit masochistic, are there any other harsh truths of filmmaking you could share? To make this a little more specific, maybe like, what do you wish you had, have you learned in the last 4 or 5 years in the process of making this film that you wish you had known going into it?"
Oh, that's a hard one. One, because there's many things, right? But if I just left you with one, I would say that like, on one level, filmmaking is about kind of like translating that vision that you've got in your head, that specific idea you've got in your head onto, into cinema. But and that's hard in itself. And it requires you knowing yourself and trusting yourself. Absolutely. But what I would say in tandem with that, with knowing yourself and trusting yourself, is that you have to do a lot of personal work because you are managing a lot of people. And I think we don't like to talk about the fact that we don't like to, as much as filmmaking is a collaboration, again, as I labor the point of power dynamics, like you're also a boss. And that means that you have to have a really good sense of yourself and the power dynamics that you have on your set, and make sure that you're constantly in check with your own emotions and how that can translate onto the people that you're collaborating with and you're asking to do very hard things. And as like we like to say, it's not brain surgery, but at the same time, like we are doing a job, and we are working with one another under some pretty tense conditions, especially if it's indie filmmaking. And the best thing that I have learned and appreciated is meditating. And what that has helped for me is that when things are incredibly hard, when it's really difficult to kind of continue having the presence of mind to be able to make the right decisions and communicate with people well. Like that meditation piece just kind of like sets everything back in a place for you to be able to kind of like find solutions with others and interact with others and in a productive way. I think that, you know, film sets are often and like historically have a very kind of like hierarchical structure. You know, you hear these kind of like commander general kind of like army terms or military terms, which I think is strange and I think sets up a weird dynamic. But also like it's been a space that's been dictated and kind of developed by white men, cis hetero white men particularly. So there's a lot of like ways of doing things that I don't think constant like translates very well or should be in practice to this day. And so again, as we think about being under strain and moving into defaults, that's what's really great about meditation. And I think it's a really great opportunity as a director um, to be trying to like practice those things as we're trying to get the best out of the people that we're collaborating with.
Well, that's wonderful. Nubia, I hope I didn't twist your conversation to make it more positive, but we hope you'll come to Memphis sometime and you can meet Nubia and some of our other filmmakers once everything opens back up. We would love to have you. I want to thank you both so much for this conversation. It was so rich and honest and honestly soothing in its honesty, and it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jourdain.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone. See you next time.